Hi guys, Togo here with a new video, and this video will be my should you main Paladin in World of Warcraft Dragonflight PvP. I'm going to discuss about Holy Paladins and Retribution Paladin. I'm going to refuse to talk about Protection Paladin because I will not promote tanks in PvP, or at least not until they changed a lot of things about tanks in PvP. I just want them to make it less cheesy, but also just more enjoyable to play with and against. I feel like most of the time whenever you're playing with a protection paladin or a guardian druid or a protection warrior, whatever tank there is, it is often either it's cheesy and you have wins that should not be a win, or either it's super bad and you don't want to play with a tank, or either it's obnoxious to play against or with because they have so many defensive capacities that they can drag the match out. And what I would like to see them is to actually change tanks as a whole, reduce that 30% damage taken, just remove it, make the abilities fit into PvP. So I know it will maybe be different from PvE, but it will give a new light and new life to those specs in PvP, and maybe people will play it more, but also will enjoy more their time playing versus those specs. Of course, I could make a whole video on how to fix tanks in PvP. Maybe it will be a future video, but for now I will concentrate on the specs that are currently good or bad on Dragonflight PvP, and those specs are healers and DPSs. So let's start with Holy Paladin, but let's talk about the class tree first. So the class tree is, I would not say a big mess, but I feel like people will probably play same-ish the whole time. Let me explain. So I'm going to remove a few points, right? So I think this one is too much because I did really quickly, but I just saw that auras of swift vengeance is not really required in PvP at least. I would then maybe put, I don't know, man. Actually, I could put this because there is nothing really super good in the class tree for Holy Paladins. But I would then take Improved Blessing of Protection, and let's take Divine Purpose. Let's take, why not Seal of Might, because we want Sanctified Wrath. And then we have like 2 points to spend. I would then spend it on Seal of Clarity. So the problem is with the class tree, it is actually something that you have barely choices. From the first row, I would say, you know that you are always going to take Freedom, you're always going to take Hammer of Wrath, of course. You still are going to take Divine Steed, Fist of Justice, because it's basically free. You take Repentance, or you have a choice with Blinding Light, something that is added for the class tree, so you can have reduced Hammer of Justice, so 30-second Hammer of Justice, plus another CD, so that CC, so that's quite good for PvP. But I feel like you don't have a lot of choices coming from that way. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a bad spec. It just means that you have like little to no choices, or you don't really need to check your class tree every matchup like other specs have. So your death into the class is a lot less. You still have Avenging Wrath in the tree. I would suggest to maybe retire that talent and just make it available for everyone. I feel like nobody's going to play without Avenging Wrath. It is a CD that is quite important and quite Paladin-esque. I don't feel like you can make it work without Avenging Wrath. And that's why I should maybe suggest you guys to maybe get it out of your talent tree and put it baseline for other specs. For Protection, Holy, and Retribution Paladin. Same for Blessing of Sacrifice. I feel like something like that should not be on the tree. It should be, I don't know, maybe higher instead of Lay on Hands, because I feel like Lay on Hands is such it's a PvE talent. You don't really have anything great with Lay on Hands. I don't think it's worthy to put a point or to get a point for free as a Holy Paladin. They should just remove that and get it baseline and put Blessing of Sacrifice instead on the same row as Blessing of Freedom. That's my opinion, and put something else there. But you get some cool things, like for example recompense. But I feel like people would just know that whenever you're playing recompense, you're not going to hit the target, so that they don't get one shot by a judgment or next word of glory bonus healing. But all in all, I can say that you get some stuff that is interesting for PvP. I'm not going to spit on Rebuke. Rebuke is a great spell. A 15 seconds interrupt. It makes it a bit easier to win versus casters as a Holy Paladin, something that is notoriously not good to play as a Holy Paladin versus casters. But now you have that. Basically, I feel like you really miss some things. I would say you could add more utility choices, or you could add new spells. But I know that paladins in general, you don't have a lot of great spells to add in, because basically all the spells that you want is actually available to you. But I think the main problem for paladins is that there is no real design choices. You know, why wouldn't you go for Sanctified Wrath and Seal of Order? Basically, you can play both without any problem, because you will have 5 more points to spend. You can spend on Off Dusk and Dawn and Seal of Order, and you're good to go. And then you have like 2 spare points to even spend, even 3 spare points to spend elsewhere. I would then suggest to spend it maybe a bit higher on the tree with Consecration, if Consecration becomes something interesting. But I feel like there is some legit concerns for paladins. I don't know if it's really justified power-wise. I feel like power-wise, they don't really lose anything. They get nerfed on the PTRs for Retribution Paladin, but I don't think design-wise, it's really good, I would say, for people that don't like to change a lot their builds. So if you don't like to always watch your class tree or your Retribution or a Holy Paladin tree, and you want to play just with one build in that set, I think the Paladin trees are good for that. But if you want to have always a choice to make, depending on the comps you're facing, depending on the enemies you're facing, then yeah, I think Paladin will be a bit harder for you to actually enjoy. But let's talk now about Holy Paladin. All in all, I feel like there is a few choices that you can make, but the main thing I see as a Holy Paladin myself on Wrath of the Lich King is I do not enjoy playing Holy Paladin in Dragonflight, in Shadowlands, in whatever expansion they did with Holy Power. I just want Holy Power to be completely removed for Holy Paladins. And I would even suggest to remove it for Retribution Paladin, but that's a whole other discussion. I feel like people might be upset for me to say that, but I feel like Holy Paladins is the spec that shows that design is not always about the complexity of the class. Holy Power by itself is more complex than Wrath of the Lich King Paladins. That by a whole, I can't even argue about that. But being more complex don't really mean that the design is good or the design is more fun. I feel like some classes that just are complex for the sake of being complex, it's just not good design. And that was my forward about Holy Paladin. I think I'm not really enjoying a lot. I could maybe suggest for you guys to play Holy Paladins, because you do enjoy the playstyle of Holy Power for some reason. I talk with a lot of Holy Paladins, and they always tell me the same thing. They don't like the current Holy Power system since the inception of Holy Power for Holy Paladins. They do not like to play how it's currently played. There is no real room to play super aggressive damage-wise either. I think in Wrath of the Lich King, if you want to burst someone down, you can as a Holy Paladin. A Shokadin build is possible to create, and as a Holy Paladin in Dragonflight, I feel like this option is really not possible, because the damage is just instantly healed by the other healers. It's not like you're going to do lasting damage towards the enemy. But let's talk really fast about the tree and what I do enjoy and what I do not enjoy. So you have a few choices on the tree. You can play more about the shocks, so Holy Shock and Judgments, and being there with instant casts, which is for sure going to be less effective than a cast heal, but you can also play around cast heal. So you have Holy Light, improvement to Holy Light, possible with illumination. So Holy Light and Flash of Light healing increased by 10%. You have also Flash of Light heals for an additional 15% when cast on a target affected by your beacon. You can also play with Holy Light heals up to 5 targets within 12 yards for 8% of its healing. So you have some good AoE healing, raid healing actually, for raids, but also for BGs, for example. Divine Favor is now just a talent and not a PvP talent, so it's something that will open up for the Holy Paladins to have a third interesting talent, PvP talents for PvP. You have also Shining Savior, again, increasing your healing. You have a lot of like talent points that are just increasing things for 5% or 10%. I feel like that's also the big complaint that I hear about Holy Paladins, is that many of those talents are really just filler talents. I feel like this Moment of Compassion, which is a 15% increased healing, is quite nice, but then you have the contrary with Divine Insight. Holy Shock's healing and damage is increased by 5% for 1 point. I feel like that's a loss. Like, it could be easily a 10% or 15% for 1 point, because it's a 1 point talent. It's a choice node. So a choice node should be more powerful than, let's say, a standalone node that you need to press to take to go further into the tree, right? Like, for example, Tyrion's Devotion, Lay on Hands cooldown is reduced by 1 second per holy power spent. I feel like that's not gonna be very usable either. Also in raids, I feel like a 7-minute fight, I guess you will get it to 5 minutes, but even then I feel like you're not going to use Lay on Hands. So I feel like this talent is also useless, but in PvE and in PvP. You have Imperial Ward, again, something that is improving a spell that is a 7-minute CD. Again, 30% increased armor, that's quite nice, but it's a 7-minute CD spell. You're going to put so many eggs, so many talents, which is really not useful, into the talent tree as high as it is, and then you have a lot less choices in general. Bestow Fate, which is a alright talent, but you have to fight between Unending Light and Bestow Fate, while they could be both on the talent tree without a problem. You could put Unending Light maybe instead of Imperial Ward, and you will have a fantastic tree to begin with, for example. Rule of Law, something that never, like, nobody really enjoys playing with that talent, and it came back. Again, you have a lot of talents actually improving your Holy Shocks on the right side as well. Like Holy Shock has a 15% increased critical strike chance. I mean, that's something that should be baseline. It should be a baseline thing, because it always had. I feel like that's 2 points kind of wasted just to progress towards the bottom side. Echoing Blessing, I think it's alright if you want to take it, but I don't think it's super interesting. It's a conduit basically. Light of the Martyr, I think something that's fun to use, but again, your beacon is not affected by it, so it's not really useful to take in PvP. You're going to damage yourself and do a subpar healing that does quite the same healing as a Holy Shock. So I don't know if it's really going to be anything good. I feel like they could just rework the spell to be usable also for Beacon of Light healing, and that you damage yourself a bit more, for example. I don't care, but something that could be useful for your group in PvP. You have a lot of, like, again, cool talents, like, for example, Barrier of Faith, but I mean, it's very hard to reach because you will have so many points to spend on other parts on the talent tree that really going for Barrier of Faith, Tears Deliverance, and Boundless Salvation, which are really fun talents, I believe. They are in contention with, let's say, Avenging Wrath Might, which is 20% increased critical strike chance, something that is very interesting for Holy Paladins in general. Awakening, again, a 2-point talent to have your normal talent that you always had. and that's quite sad. I feel like, again, it could be easily a 15% chance somewhere a bit above the tree. You can even swap Avenging Wrath Might with Awakening and put it a 1.1 pointer, and it could be alright, right? You have Blessing of Summer, something that's not really super fun to use. It's coming back, but there is no legendary power behind it, so you will have some subpar Blessing of Summer spell that really you're not never going to use in PvP. Divine Soul is coming back, something that is always going to be a fun spell to use, but it's in contention also with other talents. You will have to use Imperial Legacy, in my opinion, if you want to make Light of Dawn work with Word of Glory. So you could take some Light of Dawn talents to improve that healing, and then you will lag points because, again, if you want to play with Divine Soul, you will have to spend on Divine Resonance, and I guess Demon of Light could be interesting as well, because again, you will have a Holy Shock build, and I think Demon of Light could be some good pad damage, but also some pad healing, which is always good in PvP. So, all in all, I feel like the tree is not as bad as it may seem, but I think the main problems that I see is generally you need to spend a lot of talents to make the tree coherent. Like, if I want to play, I want to play a aggressive Holy Paladin, I will have to take Veneration. Something like a 1 pointer is actually super interesting, but you may not forget that 1 point you will have to spend it somewhere else. While this is something that could be very fun to play with, like Flash of Light, Holy Light, and in Judgment Critical Strikes, reset the cooldown of Hammer of Wrath and make it usable on any target regardless of their health. So you could do some good damage whenever you're doing a lot of crits, and every time it crits, it can reset, and then you can be like a machine gun of Hammer of Wrath, especially with Divine Soul and Divine Resonance. But again, you will like those points. I feel like, for example, Beacon of Faith could be easily a bit further, like a bit higher on the tree, or even just baseline, because I mean, everyone is going to take that in PvP. There is no real reason to not take that. Even in twos, you want to have a beacon on both characters because you want to farm holy powers easily, and without it, you cannot really farm holy power with your holy flash of light, for example, or holy light. So yeah, I mean, all in all, should you play Holy Paladin? I would say if you liked Holy Paladin in Shadowlands, there is no reason to not like it in Dragonflight. I can understand that you are maybe upset because there is not a lot of choices, or there is not a lot of like design things that you might want in Dragonflight. But all in all, if you have like one cookie cutter build and you know that's going to be very good, and you know that it is going to be actually viable in arenas, I feel like by itself, it's not really a reason to not main it. But if you are like me and you prefer to play multiple builds, multiple designs from your class and your spec, you will be a bit sour about those trees, because you know you're not going to switch a lot of talents out, and you're going to be more static, and you will have to play that class and spec the same way until the end of Dragonflight, or if they rework mid-season, but that's also possible, but it's less likely because, again, they have to work on the next expansion, and they need to work on other patches, they need to work on other classes, so we don't know if they're going to do any rework mid-season or mid-patches, or while the patches are going to roll out. So PvP talent-wise, you do get a few good talents, like for example Precognition, still always good if you're playing a Flash of Light build or a Holy Light build. Vengeance Aura, I feel like it's a talent that you will have to use in RBGs, but in arenas, I think you're good. You can play without it. And Aura of Reckoning might be super interesting to do the damage, because your next judgment deals 200% increased damage. You could do some sick damage with Aura of Reckoning. I feel like all in all, you could make Holy Paladins fun, but you have to sacrifice a lot of defensive capacities, and those defensive capacities might be the trick to actually survive damage. So it depends if it's going to be viable or not. Okay, let's talk about now the Retribution Paladin. And we already talked about the class tree. The class tree is a bit the same like it always had been. But the good thing is you have Repentance extra, so you have extra CC. You have, again, Rebuke stays the same. Actually, everything stays the same, really, except you get a other CC possibility with Repentance. You have also the possibility to play super aggressive with 2 extra points in Seal of the Crusader with Zealot's Paragon, and then you can just take a bit more points into maybe Aspiration of Divinity and of Dusk and Dawn, which is not really the most fun talents to play, but it is something that you can play around for. Now let's talk about the Retribution Paladin tree. I saw a lot of complaints too, but I don't know if it's going to be very justifiable. I feel like the tree is not bad by itself, but I can understand that it is very hard to actually make other design or builds work. Basically, in the I'm going to talk about soft part, right? You're always going to play Ashes to Ashes because you will have Ashes to Dust, you will have Wake of Ashes, and you will have Blade of Wrath. So you will always have more procs for your Art of War procs, and you gain Seraphim, which is something that is going to get extra damage for you because you have Sanctified Wrath instead of Seraphim. So you will always have a moment where you will do a lot of damage whenever it procs. But you will have to play with Imperial Legacy, so which is still a point that you have to spend. So you already spent 3 points. And then you have Divine Toll, which is super easy to get. You get Divine Toll, you get Divine Resonance. Boom, you already spent so many points. You have spent in total 5 points for this middle side. And now you only have 5 more points to spend. Where do you spend? Well, you have only 2 choices. Either you play on the right side, which is Final Verdict, and you play the good old way, which is putting 2 points in Templar's Verdiction, Final Verdict, so 3 points, and then you have like 2 points left. You can play with Vanguard's Momentum, or you put 2 more points into Relentless Inquisitor to get more haste with your finishes. Basically, that's the right side. The left side is the same. You play Relentless Inquisitor, Execution Sentence, and then you play with either Executioner's Will or Executioner's Wrath. Again, you will have to spend 4 points, and you will have 1 more point to spend. 1 more point. And that 1 point will have to be spent somewhere which doesn't help you. So you will have either eye for an eye if you're playing versus physical damage dealers, or you play with Tempest of the Lightbringer if you're playing RPGs, so you do more like AoE damage with your Divine Storm with your Imperial Legacy, or you play with Holy Crusader, which is a boring 2% increased mastery buff. So you already see that you don't really have a lot of choices. Most people will play with the right side because you will get Final Verdict, which is something that is super interesting because it is a 10-yard range, something that is actually desirable for Paladins, and you will have to sacrifice Execution Sentence for that. And I think everyone will play with the right side and the middle side. And there is maybe a world where you don't play with the right side and left side, you do play with Virtuous Command and Final Reckoning, which is also a fun ability to use. But then you have only 2 points extra to spend, and those 2 points will lead you to nothing. You will have to pick, I think, either Relentless Inquisitor or Templar's Vindication, or you pick Righteous Verdict with another 1 pointer. So I feel they need to change something. I don't know what, because you don't really have a lot of 3-pointers or 2-pointers, but I feel like the tree layout kind of tells you how to play the class and not really you being able to choose how to play the class. And that's my opinion. I think that's why people are mad. I don't think the damage nerfs or whatever they are going to stick in PvP. I think Paladins will be viable. I think they will have some good damage in PvP. There's a reason why they are getting nerfed, because the damage is too high, at least in PvE. And I think in PvP, they are going to stick with the damage that is currently on, or they are going to slap a little PvP nerf or a PvP buff if it's too over nerfed in PvE. So the main question is, what is new on the Retribution Paladin tree? I would say nothing really, because you have Divine Protection, but it's a 20% wall. So why would you sacrifice Shield of Vengeance, which does crazy amounts of damage whenever it is actually exploding? And 20% for 8 seconds, while not usable in stuns, I think, is something that is not really viable for a Retribution Paladin. I think a lot of people wanted a wall because it's more reliable than a shield, but I think a lot of people will still play with Shield of Vengeance. You have still Ashes to Ashes, which is the 4 set. You still have Healing Hands, you still have Hand of Hindrance, you still have some things here and there, but I don't think there's anything new. You have talents that you would never take now, like easily takeable, because you have the place for that. So Empyrean Power, which is something that will give you more damage on your Device Storm whenever it procs. And of course, I think you can still go for Exorcism, but again, you will have to spend your points wisely. And I don't know if it's Exorcism is something that is going to be very viable in PvP, depending on the damage. I feel like a dot damage is always nice to have versus specific classes, but you see that the options that you have as a Retribution Paladin is very, very limited. So should you main Retribution Paladin in PvP? I feel like if you, again, it's a question very simple. It's always a buff or a upgrade from Shadowlands. I feel like Shadowlands was the building block, and now Dragonflight is actually taking that class and stepping into another level. So if you liked Shadowlands Paladin, or at least Shadowlands Retribution Paladin, I would then suggest to play Retribution Paladin in Dragonflight. But if you didn't like Retribution Paladin in Shadowlands, it is not now that you're going to like it in Dragonflight, because they didn't change anything about the design. I feel like everything is still the same. You still have your legendaries. You do get free legendaries here and there, but I don't know how you can change a Retribution Paladin towards a more fun design wise, with choices. It's very hard to actually talk about Retribution Paladin without changing everything. So for now, we'll keep that tree, and yeah, I feel like if you want to main Retribution Paladin, it is going to be good in PvP probably. Like always, you will have some good comps where you can make it work. You still are a support DPS. I don't think you will be a primary DPS. But yeah, again, I think all in all, Paladins are quite alright to play. I don't know if it's going to be very viable in PvP in Dragonflight. I look forward to see the tier lists. I look forward to see the PvP, the matches, and how it's going to be evolving in Dragonflight. But let me know in the comment section below what you think about the trees for Holy Paladins and Retribution Paladins. Actually, really not sad, but disappointed for Paladins, because again, I think a lot of people would have liked to go back to the Wrath of the Lich King days with a bit more spells. I think Paladin wise, they were very fun to play, and they are still very fun to play. And I feel like with Holy Power and with the removal of some specs and some aspects, makes it a bit more annoying to play than, like, let's say in Cataclysm or even in Wrath of the Lich King. So yeah, so I'm going to stop this video right now. I will make a should you main X class video very soon. I think I'm going to make first a guide about Wrath of the Lich King, but I will come back with, let's say, Rogue. So my next class video will be about rogues. I'm going to talk in depth about combat, outlaw, assassination, and subtlety rogues, and I'm going to make it as interesting as possible, of course. But I look forward to see you guys on those videos. So thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Please be sure to stay safe. We will catch each other very soon with a next video. Have a great day. Bless you. Bye.